Mr. Real Nightmares, Episode 15. When I was just a young child, around 8 years old, we had a neighbor who always seemed a bit peculiar. He rarely interacted with other people, only uttering a few words to my father. I can still vividly recall the piercing gaze of his bright blue eyes as he watched people pass by his house. He appeared relatively normal, a tall man with tan skin and brown hair. In his early Zero-esque, the sweltering heat of summer hung heavy in the air, and my dad had a side job cleaning people's carpets. One day, our enigmatic neighbor approached my father and asked if he could clean his carpet. My dad agreed, and the neighbor instructed him to leave it on the front porch once he was done. Within 3 days, my father, being diligent, completed the job a day ahead of schedule. He decided to deliver the cleaned carpet immediately. When he reached the neighbor's house, he knocked repeatedly, but there was no response. This was perplexing because my father knew that the man was currently unemployed and his wife should have been home. Their car was parked in the garage, confirming their presence. He knocked again, growing increasingly concerned. With reluctance, he left, perplexed by the silence that had enveloped the neighbor's home. The next morning, as my father returned home from the market with our groceries, he was visibly distressed. He confided in my mother, and eventually she shared a harrowing revelation. The neighbor had murdered his wife while my father was standing at the front door knocking. He had viciously slashed her throat with a brutal weapon, possibly a large knife or something even more horrifying. The man's erratic behavior was attributed to his mental health issue, exacerbated by his irregular medication regimen. He functioned somewhat normally when he adhered to his medication, but tragically, his wife fell victim to his untreated condition that day. I often find myself haunted by the question of what might have occurred if my father had entered the house. I'm eternally grateful that he did not. This next chilling story is a tale my friend shared, and it's a spine-tingling experience that unfolded a few years ago. One evening, her parents went out for dinner at a restaurant, extending an invitation to my friend to accompany them. However, she declined as she had an impending test the following day, necessitating her to stay home and study. As the clock approached 7 p.m., her parents departed, leaving her in solitude. She sat in her room, engrossed in her studies, but the relentless rain outside created a cacophonous backdrop that made it nearly impossible to concentrate. In search of solace, she donned her headphones and immersed herself in music, inadvertently isolating herself from the world. Unbeknownst to her, a half hour later, the front door swung open. It was a sound she should have heard, but the headphones kept her oblivious to the intrusion. Thirst soon beckoned her to the kitchen, prompting her to remove her headphones and venture downstairs. It was then that she began hearing eerie footsteps. These weren't the steps of her parents, who were not expected back until later. Confusion and apprehension set in as she noticed her parents' car conspicuously absent in the parking lot. From her window, panicked, she hastily retreated to her room and locked the door. The realization that someone uninvited was inside her home sent shivers down her spine. In her moment of desperation, she called her parents, who were dining at the restaurant. They immediately abandoned their meal and raced home, all the while instructing her to remain in her room. Meanwhile, they contacted the police en route. Huddled in her closet, my friend listened anxiously as the intruder climbed the stairs, attempting to force entry into each room. When the intruder reached her door and realized it was locked, the pounding on the door became relentless. A chilling voice pierced the air, demanding entry. However, just as the intruder seemed on the verge of breaking in, the distant wail of sirens filled the night. Startled, the intruder fled, and my friend remained hidden until the police arrived to rescue her. Subsequent searches of the area yielded no sign of the trespasser, leaving leaving my friend traumatized and fearful. She has never been comfortable staying home alone since that night, and she has never dared to wear headphones again for fear of what she might not hear. Lastly, here's a tale from my own past, a nightmarish encounter that transpired when I was just 14 years old. I live in Australia, although my Middle Eastern background informs my heritage. It was a quiet night, and I was alone in my bedroom, the soft glow of my phone's light casting an eerie atmosphere. My family members were scattered throughout the house, each engrossed in their own pursuits. The clock near 9 p.m., and the tranquility of the house hung heavily in the air. Suddenly, an unsettling noise emanated from the living room. I initially